So today we're going to be talking about beyond the basics with the cyber range, and what this is this is actually something I've wanted to do every conference that we've had, uh, basically showing or talking about how you can use the range to do more advanced topics like we have a limited amount of courseware that's available, and you guys are educators. You might know more than we do about certain topics, and you might want to create something of your own to to supplement what we already provide you. So if there's a specific area that you're strong in and you want to make extra exercises for your students, that's kind of what we want to show here. It'd also be a helpful topic for anyone that's looking to work with us as a content author to provide additional material and working with us to provide more material to Virginia and other students across the country, which I do believe we have the ability to reimburse you for your time if you want to work with us on the content authorship. But I will warn you that it's a full program of material that has to be provided. So don't just jump right in there. Make sure you talk to us first and understand what's coming on with that. Before I go too deep into the topics today, I did want to say that I'm going to cover a bunch of different topics that are kind of covering the range of things that people run into as they're trying to create custom images in the range. You don't have to understand every concept of this. Some of this won't apply depending on what you're trying to do. But so just bear with us if we're going over a section that doesn't apply to you. So some of the topics that we're going to talk about here are what are the limitations of working within a range, how you can go about modifying an existing exercise environment. So if there's something that's already there that you want to make a change to and redistribute, we'll have a little demo there of that. Some of the additional changes that you can get by putting in a support ticket and talking to us. And then what's available for content authors, some of the advanced or more detailed exercise building options that we have. So to start, I just want to give you a simplified design of how your student's environment exists in the range. So you can see here we have this red section at the bottom of this image that contains one or more virtual machines. And these are the machines that are assigned to each specific student in your course for that exercise group. So it ties together. If you're doing something like cyber basics, there's 4 virtual machines that are all surrounded in this little red firewall bubble, which I'm using simplified terms here. In some cases, there's 1 machine, sometimes 2, 3, or up to 4 virtual machines can exist in this little bubble. Within that bubble, well, I'll get to that in a second. So outside of this bubble, we have a secure subnet that is designed to contain the students' environments as well as the supporting infrastructure that allows them access to the range. This includes the RDP SSH service that allows them to come in through the web browser to their virtual machine. And then for outgoing traffic, we have a squid proxy, which is in place to help filter the content that students might be able to access so that we can provide the same kind of security measures that a lot of K-12 institutions have to deal with students, such as making sure they don't go to websites that their parents would not be happy with them visiting. So we have a squid proxy in place, and the squid proxy is the only way that students can get out to the internet. Any other traffic that isn't going through the squid proxy is blocked. That does include things like ping and trace route. So I'll get to that back in a second. So what's in scope for what you can or cannot attack in the range? Basically, what's in scope is the things in the red bubble. You can attack the machine that you're on itself. You can attack other machines that come up with that virtual machine that are usually addressable by something.example.com. But you can't attack the squid service, the RDP service, the load balancers that are supporting both of those things. You really can't attack any DNS server that stood up automatically or already exists. And you can't try to escape the virtual machine to get to the underlying host. You also can't attack the network infrastructure. So that's kind of like all the out of scope things. It sounds like a lot of things, but if you think about it, if you had a lab in a physical lab for cybersecurity education, you wouldn't want the students to go in there, unplug a network cable, and then plug some other device in there and try and do things outside of the other network. No, the lab itself is the test range. It's not, what can you do to the limits of the range to try and possibly do something else outside of it. So there are exceptions to this. So I don't want you to attack DNS servers, but if you stand up your own DNS server and you're pointing your virtual machine to that DNS server that's now inside the red bubble, that's fine. That's perfectly fine. If you want to try and attack a file server, don't stand one up outside of the range and try and have your students attack it. I mean, you could. We probably won't catch it, depending on what we're looking at that moment. But it's not recommended because you're exposing, you're giving students the idea that they can attack something that is not in the safe bubble that we're trying to create for them. But if you stood up a file server alongside the virtual machine that they're doing the attacks on, they can go back and forth. We don't stop any traffic between any of the virtual machines within that red bubble. It is completely open for you to attack. So jumping back to pinging the internet, we really want to encourage students to stay within the bubble, and we want to encourage you as instructors or content authors to keep them within that bubble. Using things like ping and traceroute are very common network diagnostic techniques, but you can also do attacks through them. So we've kind of had discussions, and right now our viewpoint is we don't want to encourage people to ping or traceroute or otherwise do anything ICMP related to external targets, because then we have to then monitor that to make sure that it's all safe traffic and not somebody trying to play around with the ping of death or some other attacks. So with that being said, we have gone through a lot of effort. We've probably spent weeks trying to make sure that this squid proxy will work on all of the existing images using all of the existing software that's installed. So things like curl, wget. If we installed Firefox or Chrome already or Chromium, if they're installed, we've generally tested to make sure that they will respect the proxy and work through the proxy. It is possible that we've missed something. If we did, please let us know. But if it's something you've installed after the fact, or if you're adding new users, obviously that's kind of more on your side. If you're adding new applications and new users and they don't respect the proxy, well then I've now given you the proxy information. It's littered all over the VM already, but here it is in a slide. So if you wanted to configure a proxy, that's the address and the port to use. And these are all perfectly fine. As long as that traffic's going through the proxy, that's good. As long as you're not attacking the proxy. So with that said, we're going to move over to showing a simple snapshotting and copying process. This is something we've had in the range for years now. And I wanted to give people a good demo. So I'm going to pass this over to Jules.
All right. All right, so if you're in the range and you have an exercise environment, we are using Brigante for this example, and you want to make some kind of tailoring to the environment. You want to, create folder structures, upload files, install custom software, make shifts to the environment. You go on into your environment. Let me fire it up. And good thing I saved that password. So Brigante is a war game where you travel level to level and you find a flag, use it, learning Linux command line stuff and some basic networking. It gets progressively more difficult. I'm just gonna jump on over into a slightly higher level, and I've already pulled out the password from there. So I'm SSHing into this container. And here I am. And Brigante also has a web server, which is giving you the instructions. So in this one, okay, there's a file called Foo Saloon. So what if I want to drop another flag somewhere in there to ensure that my students are, not getting answers from a previous semester or some kind of shenanigans? If we look at the permissions on the files that are here, we set it up so that they were pretty locked down. So I'm just going to drop another file in, secret. secret file, the flag, the fallage, the flat. My goodness, is flag. All right, I did it, guys. I can type. I swear. All right, let's say I want to change the permissions on secret file. All right. Cool. Now I have secret file in there. And instead of, level 8, maybe I want them to take a snapshot of that to upload so that I know that they have been doing the exercises properly. Okay, so at that point, I guess that doesn't matter. I'm going to get out of here. I am going to stop my instance of Brigante. And now this is the Brigante image which I want my students to have. Once it finishes stopping, I will have the option to snapshot the state, the current state of this image. Stopping, stopping, stopping. It is important to first exit your instance, fully stop your instance. Then you will copy that instance state with this here middle button. I'm going to put in name my Brigante. My exercise has been copied. Yes. And now what this means is when I go back up to my course level and I want to add an exercise environment, I now, well, it's still in process, but instead of just having the environments Brigante, which I initially had seen, I will now have the option under copied environments to share this snapshot. So some considerations with snapshotting, and I know my coworker Tweaks would very much like me to
Before we
speak.
jump into that, I just want to jump in and highlight that's a very simple example just to show you how the process is done. But even something like that is an excellent way. Yeah, if you could plug in that flag or that value in that file, you might be able to tie that into your learning management system so you can auto grade. If you don't want to go the pathway where people take screenshots and upload that to the learning management system, maybe you can just put a few of those into a quiz and grade the quiz by the fact that they can provide those snapshotted values. But again, this is just an example that the sky is the limit almost on what you can do in those virtual machines, since you have full access to them. So, all right, anyway, sorry, go ahead, Jules.
No, you're totally kosher. Thank you, Lee. So just some considerations, things to be careful to not inadvertently give your students access to. Any kind of authentication you may have done, your web, Google Drive, or LMS authentication tokens and cookies, your root bash history files, forgotten files, documents, or answer keys, like what you've downloaded. So just be aware that not only in your main VM, which you might log into, but if there are other VMs or containers in your environment, make sure that you want to sanitize. Make sure you want to consider sanitizing all of the VMs to ensure your students don't get more access than you intend them to. So that's just my little spiel on snapshotting. Let me toss it back to Lee.
Helps to unmute. All right. So catching back up on the slides. So here are some of the other additional changes that you can request that are relatively easy, and we generally will be able to fulfill these. We generally provide a lot of the virtual machines available with the full GUI interface. We feel that generally works better for introductory students, but we are very happy to provide you with SSH access to a lot of these virtual machines instead, if that's what your preference is for your students to work with. In that case, they would essentially be getting a web browser-based SSH terminal. It would not support multiple terminals, although they could open up multiple tabs to have multiple terminals, essentially. We like that methodology if your students are available to do that, because it has a much lower bandwidth requirement. So if you're trying to teach more advanced concepts that don't necessarily need a GUI because they're more server based and not necessarily using things like Wireshark or other GUI based tools, then an SSH connection will give the students a more reliable, better connection, even if they're on a weak connection themselves. We could generally support, an SSH session on practically a dial-up modem, whereas a GUI session, a lot of students really need something like 1 megabit, at least 1 megabit a second to have a decent experience, since we're talking about streaming video essentially is what the RDP is doing. It's very optimized for what it's doing, but it's still pushing a lot of images around effectively. We're also able to merge two existing images, but that comes with the caveat that we want you to consider the tax dollar cost, or if you're on the US cyber range, what it actually costs, since that'll pass through. So we'll look for like justification if you want to add something to the Virginia cyber range that's merging them together. For instance, I'm teaching a Linux Plus class, and I would love for my students to be able to see CentOS, Ubuntu, Kali, and Debian, but it would not be a wise use of the range to make one giant exercise group that has all four of those together if the intention isn't for the student to use them simultaneously or against each other. In that case, it'd be better to spin up those types of virtual machines independently so that they can start and stop them when they want to, and that perhaps you can add them into your course when it's appropriate for that topic to be discussed. Obviously, as teachers, we all know that there's never enough money coming to us educators. So, try to be considerate of us. And if we push back, understand that we're just trying to be respectful of the tax dollars. But an example that would be very easy to justify would be, for instance, we have Cyber Basics. It comes with the DVWA, Darn Vulnerable Web Application, if you're not familiar, which is a web server that has a lot of vulnerabilities exposed on it. Cyber Basics also comes with a file server, and I don't remember what the other one is right now. We have a lot of images.
Samba server, the Samba.
Yeah. So if you wanted, instead of using Kali and DVWA, if you just wanted to extract that out and then switch have DVWA with Ubuntu, that's an easy thing for us to do. We can stitch those two together and get you that item. That's something that you do need our help with because you really can't change operating systems yourself. We give you root access to a VM, but you can't go in and change Ubuntu over to Kali or whatnot. Or you could, but if you're the kind of person who just said, "Oh yeah, you can't," probably not a good idea. Some of the other considerations are if you're doing something and the virtual machine that we're providing itself is just not capable of doing it, like if you need to, if you really need extra disk space, or if you're doing something that the VM itself is causing you a problem because it's underperforming, then give us a support ticket. We'll see what we can do to try and bump the specs up. Again, with that same kind of consideration of tax dollars. Storage is probably one of the most expensive things. That's why we generally have the machines very lean. Our storage bill is probably one of the biggest costs that we have. So, work with us, we'll work with you. If you want to do disk forensics and you want a terabyte of disk space, that's gonna be very difficult for us to pull off. But we can probably negotiate somewhere in the middle where you can still get the concept that you need to teach across, because that's what we're here to support you, get these concepts across. But how much of the extra disk space might be fluff or not necessarily important to teach the concept. So work with us, we'll work with you. Some of the things that we really can't do is helping you with a personal DNS like server setup or any service setup that is just for use in your class. We only have 3 people on our team that are able to do this kind of work. So we can't help every teacher with everything. But if you're willing to take a little extra step and work with us and actually publish this material to other teachers, then we can go a little bit further. We can if you're working with our courseware team and you're making courseware that we can distribute to other instructors, we have somebody set aside this dedicated to work with our authors to try and come up with this. You of course need to be actually a somewhat knowledgeable in that subject since you're writing the courseware that's going to be going to all the instructors. But we can also then help you with the customizations that are involved with that environment so that we can then distribute it back out to the hundreds of instructors that need this material. We also are happy to take requests if you find things out there like CyberStart or Seed Labs that are, essentially free or very low cost and available to help cybersecurity education. We are happy to take those requests and see if we can try and import those virtual machines in there. We've actually worked with the gentleman that does Seed Labs, and we're actually hoping to bring the Seed Labs into the range with an official image that's worked with that author so that his course material will work with what the range can provide, and we can actually get that to more instructors. So our goal here is to help you instructors teach, but we have limited resources just like you all do. So, work with us, we work with you. That's what it comes down to. And with that, I am happy to start taking some questions. And I think we have a little bit of time left, so I might be able to demo something else at the end, but we'll see if we have any questions first. Let's see if I can find the... Brian, do you have the chat up? Do we have any questions?
Yeah, I have the chat up. I'm not seeing any questions at the moment. I do see one just asking about where the documents are, your slide.
Oh yeah, those will be uploaded immediately after this presentation.
Okay.
We'll try and put those up there, and we'll make a note of that in either the Q&A or the chat section. All right, if nobody has any questions, I will add one extra bonus presentation here.
Awesome.
Okay. So one of the features of the range that a lot of people are not aware of is the ability to upload files. So I'm going to show you how to upload a file. I say this with a caution that this is probably not a great way to get information into a virtual machine if it's a very large file, because we're talking about, imagine I'm the student and I'm trying to upload an image to a file to my virtual machine. If that file is 5 gigabytes, then I first have to download it from the internet onto my local machine. And then from my local machine, I have to upload it to the virtual machine. So if this is a gigantic file, it would be better to actually pull it in from the interface from the VM itself to try and log in and download the file or curl the file, wget, whatever your preferred tool is. But if you wanted to do a file upload, on Mac it is Shift Control Command, and on Windows it would be Shift Alt Control, and it brings up this little side menu here. This is actually where you can actually access the clipboard. It generally works seamlessly, so you don't even notice that this is here, but in some cases, the clipboard needs a little extra help if the virtual machine and the client aren't able to cooperate. For instance, if the student doesn't allow the browser to access their clipboard, they might have additional trouble, or if the VM itself doesn't have the clipboard agent, because some Linux machines don't have a clipboard agent, you might have to do some extra steps here to try and get things connected. But for the purposes of file upload, you see here / it's kind of like not really helpful, but if you're in the Linux world, / means root. So this is actually saying that this is the root file system here. So if you see, I just did that, and now I pulled up essentially a file browser here on within my window, and I can go into my student's home directory, and I can upload a file to the student's home directory, which I'm going to do right now. So you can see down here, it did a file transfer. I'm going to close this window. And we now see that test.txt has been uploaded pretty much right now. I think that's in UTC time there. So cat test, and this is a test file. So this works really great for small files. It's a great way to get some small things in there. The caveat that you have to be aware of here is that you'll notice it uploaded as student. So if I tried to do that upload to the root or into Etsy, it probably wouldn't be allowed because the student user is not allowed to write files to those directories. That said, I have root, so I could easily move this file using sudo permissions or switching over to root and making such changes if I wanted to. But this is a nice little easy way to get files into the virtual machine that a lot of people aren't aware of, so I figured I'd share that.
Would you be able to show the keyboard shortcuts again? We had someone in the chat ask a question. If you could just show
Sure.
those again to open the window.
The keyboard shortcuts would be on Mac, it is Shift, Control, Command. And on Windows, it is Alt, Control, Shift. And I think on Mac, it's a little bit more finicky. I think you have to start with Shift, then Control, then Command, and it comes up. I think it just has to deal with how the host operating system, the student's operating system, reads those key combinations. And I think if you start with Command, it doesn't make it to the browser. Generally speaking, all the virtual machines that we publish starting in 2019 have the support for that. There are some old virtual machines, like old Ubuntu 14, I believe does not support it. We do our best to try and do that, and we generally will, when we're aware that there's an issue like that, we try to put a note on there because we know copy paste is a feature that people really like. Unfortunately, very old versions of Ubuntu had an issue with their clipboard when connecting remotely, so we weren't able to fix that one. But every image we make from now on, we will dedicate a week or two just to figuring out and making sure that things like the copy and paste work. So we definitely put a lot of time to make sure that this is as easy as possible for you and your students.
Okay, so looks like Jeremy Staples is saying, I'm sorry, but can you say the Mac shortcut one more time?
Sure, and I'll type it out here in chat. The Mac shortcut is Shift, Control, Command. Yeah, I see that question there. So what is the status of our current Ubuntu image? I know that we are actively working on getting the Ubuntu images up. I think we have an Ubuntu 18 GUI currently available. I think we're working on the Ubuntu 18 SSH access right now. And we are working on Ubuntu 20 images. Ubuntu 20, those that are aware, like that just came out 2 months ago, 3 months ago. It's hard to keep track now of the days with working from home all the time, but it just came out at the beginning of the summer. So we're trying to get the Ubuntu 20 images into the range before the fall, hopefully. And if not before, then during the fall, we'll hopefully have the Ubuntu 20 images in the range. As for Cyber Patriot, I don't know if we have the images for Cyber Patriot, but if they're willing to work with us on those, we hopefully could have that in the range. I'm not super familiar with their program, but if they're providing courseware and it available to you instructors, then that's a perfect candidate of what we would like to get into the range, because our goal is to make it so that you guys don't have to deal with virtualization. Yeah, if they're very strict and they simply won't work with us, then we can't. But since we are, we're a government agency, so maybe they'll give us some leeway. And since we can control who kind of has access to a lot of that information, maybe they'll be more open. But it really depends if they're also strict about not even letting students see the images. So we really have to figure out what their requirements on.
But we're grateful for you to be working with us, so thanks.
So yeah, well, I mean, that's a perfect example of somebody that we'd at least try. I can't say that we will always be able to get it, but okay. I mean, if they're distributing it and they're less strict on the practice stuff, then we probably. Oh, for their competitions, yeah, I don't, unless they want to use us to actually host the competition, then I don't know if they'll give us competition images. But if they're distributing the practice ones freely, they probably would be okay with us getting a copy of that in the range so that you don't have to deal with the virtualization stuff. So I'd be happy to, forward that on to our business side so they can start reaching out and seeing if they're willing to work with us. And if you see anything similar to that, definitely let us know. I mean, we found Seed Labs because one instructor reached out and said, "Hey, can you put this up?" And we're like, "Sure, let's talk to the author." And that's how it happened. So, I know CyberStart was a similar thing. So, although I don't think we got it up, I think we got it up just in time, but I think a lot of people already had their own virtual machines at that point. Yeah, I mean, we'd have to see what their requirements are. Although that does remind me, I should point out that when you make a snapshot, those snapshots are owned by you essentially forever. We don't currently have a deletion policy for snapshots. So we also don't have a way for you to delete them currently because it's not a heavily used feature, which is part of the reason why I want to demo it, because I want people to use it and utilize it and like it. So we want to eventually make management of those snapshots a little bit easier. And I do want to point out that we try to cycle our images out somewhat regularly so that we can keep up with the latest releases of virtual machines. But we will try to keep, the latest Ubuntu 18 or Ubuntu 16, as long as it's feasible for us to continue to maintain it.